In some form or another, most of us are interested in finding our own power. Power in today's society is incredibly valued, but there are different ways to wield power. And what I want to talk about on today's podcast is how we can be powerful as feminine women and how to lean into the power inherent in our femininity. Welcome to the Satisfied Woman podcast. I'm your host, Alanna Kaivalya. This podcast is dedicated to helping women lean into their femininity and rediscover the power of their feminine gifts. We take a look at what it means to be a modern woman and how we can live a satisfied life on our own terms. Visit the hub at thesatisfiedwoman.com. And new for you today, actually, on the podcast is a special page just for podcast listeners to get all of the best freebies, resources, and gifts I have to offer you via my website. So check all that out at thesatisfiedwoman.com/empowerme. And I thought today's podcast episode was a great day to bring this new page forward for you, the /empowerme page, because we are talking about the concept of feminine power. And I want to discuss its significance in today's world and how it contrasts with traditional notions of power. So let's start with the more traditional notions and where we're coming from, and probably what you think of or even experience in your own life as what people think is power. So first of all, power is often associated with strength. Meaning physical strength or physical might. We think of cars or trucks as powerful. I think of the horses I enjoy riding as powerful. I think of people who work out in the gym as powerful. And yes, there is a lot of power in strength for sure, but those are two different qualities. You can be strong and still be incredibly weak. So even if you can lift 9 million pounds with some pretty fierce biceps, if you don't have the capacity to stand in your own power, your own internal power, then what kind of strength do you really have? Lifting weights or being physically strong certainly is one thing. Standing in your own power is the sense of knowing who you are. Knowing truly who you are to your core and having the freedom or the agency to actually be that in the world. Now, when I describe it that way, it might be easy to understand that for women, this has been a very difficult thing to do in the past, and even still today remains an uphill battle. Being free to be who we are as women can often be very dangerous in many ways. It can be physically dangerous, emotionally dangerous, psychologically dangerous. Living in a patriarchal society as we do means that feminine gifts and qualities are typically devalued. And so it feels like we are compromising something if we really lean into our femininity, stand in our true power, and unleash those gifts on the world. Many of us, me included, right? I speak because I have the experience too, hide our femininity and our womanhood to some extent in order to try to lean into what is viewed as masculine forms of power. So we often associate power with masculinity as well, not just that physical strength, but the power to make decisions, the power to lead. We think of our military as strong and powerful, and we typically think of the military as a more masculine endeavor or masculine career choice or masculine pathway. It doesn't necessarily have to be. Remember, femininity can be done in any arena. It's just going to be that you do things a little differently. Feminine women can absolutely be in the military. I've known many of them who are incredibly strong and powerful. They're going to hold that military might in a different way. They're going to hold it in a feminine way. So there is a difference between masculine power and feminine power. Power does not just belong to the masculine. And of course, in a distorted way, masculine power has often been used to oppress. So there's a concept of power over versus power with. Now, power over is typically how distorted power looks. We have power over someone else, power over a situation, power over a decision, power over a household. When people feel like they have power over others, it does maybe for a moment, or maybe in a false way, give them a sense of accomplishment or pride or control. Anytime we feel a sense of control over someone or power over someone, what that requires, unfortunately, is for us to take power away from them. And this has often been the plight of the woman. So, for those of you, I release this podcast as an audio podcast, of course, on all of the podcast channels that you're familiar with, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. But I also release this podcast as a video on iTunes. Oh, and Spotify just started having video podcasts as well. So if you happen to be watching the video of this podcast, you'll see that in this episode, I'm wearing a scarf. And this is a wool scarf. It is kind of a cream color, and it's got beautiful pink flowers printed on it. And it matches the shirt I'm wearing. I thought I'd tie it all in today for you. Now, the reason this scarf is important, and I promise relevant to the topic of power, is because this was my grandmother's scarf. Now, when you read my book, The Way of the Satisfied Woman, which I sure hope you do, or if you read any of the blogs that I've posted on my website, thesatisfiedwoman.com, you're going to hear a lot about my grandmother. She was perhaps the most powerful an influential woman in my life as a young girl. And even to this day, she passed away in 2018. And to this day, she is still the voice in my head I imagine when my intuition comes through. She's the voice that I hear. She was an incredibly powerful figure in my life, but her background was from a very unempowered place, or a disempowered place. She went through World War II. And I mean, I don't think anybody who went through World War II went through it in a not traumatic way. But my grandmother's path through World War II was particularly traumatic. She was taken from her home in the Ukraine at the age of 14, separated from her family, put into a prison camp, and essentially forced to work. She was forced labor for many years in that prison camp on her own as a young woman. She wasn't fed properly. She wasn't treated properly. Of course, she was abused. And she was disempowered. She was in a place where her power was taken away from her, and she wasn't allowed to be who she was. Now, as a result, she became very quiet. Her voice got shut off, and I think that this is something that happens to many women who are in any kind of situation where they are disempowered. Their voice gets squashed. And one of the qualities, of course, of powerful femininity is our communication. We do love to gab. We just do. This is true of any feminine woman. And if it's not true for you as a feminine woman, just, consider that maybe there's something that needs to be said, or perhaps you're saying it in a different way. Perhaps you're saying it through art, or perhaps you're saying it through text messages, or perhaps you're saying it through the way you physically communicate. But we really hold the pathways of connection and communication in our femininity. So she really shut that down. She was quite quiet. She reduced her opinions. She reduced her footprint. She reduced her mark. She basically played small. And that was the way she stayed alive. So that is, of course, an appropriate coping mechanism. But it didn't allow her to flourish. And as a young woman, this experience of going through World War II was very impactful for her. It was certainly something she never forgot. And as I witnessed her growing up, and I had the great fortune to spend a lot of time with her, it affected her every single day. There wasn't a day that went by that either she didn't mention it or relive a memory or tell me about something or behave in a way that reflected those years that she was not only in the prison camp during World War II, but she actually ended up staying there as a refugee after the war for 13 years until she was able to emigrate to America with my grandfather and her two daughters, of course, one of those being my mother. So her power was taken from her, not only by the very difficult circumstances of war, but by the men and the masculine paradigm that was in charge at that time, forcing her to play small and essentially, as I like to call it, to delete herself. She had to minimize her footprint. She had to delete her personality. She had to delete her impact. And as I speak these words, I think about the times in my own life that I've had to do that under difficult circumstances. And perhaps you'll think about the times in your life that you've also had to do the same thing. That there would have been something you would have said, but you kept your mouth shut. That you had an intuitive knowing that something was not okay, and yet you did it anyway. That you had a desire to bring something forth into the world, a creative endeavor, and you kept that desire quiet and unrealized because bringing something into the world at the time would have been either unsafe or unwelcome. So I grew up with these stories from my grandmother who, by the time I arrived on the scene, she had regained some of her power. She had come into herself a little bit more. And for those of you watching the video, you can see this beautiful scarf I'm wearing. And trust me, I don't have a lot of things from my grandmother, but the things that I have are precious and they are colorful. My grandma had style. When she got to America, she decided, especially since she couldn't afford to purchase clothing, that she would learn to sew. And she sewed all the clothing that she wore over the years. And they were beautiful. And I have some of those items. Maybe I'll wear one on a future podcast. She had beautiful scarves that she'd always wear. She just loved colors. She loved flowers. And that was part of her own self-expression. She leaned into once she was free from basically being told what to wear, what to do, what to say every single day. So I loved that element of self-expression. I loved her coming into her own. And some of the things that made her feel powerful was having a career. She loved being a career woman. When she got to America, she was able to find a very simple minimum wage job that didn't require any skills because, of course, she didn't have any education. I think she went to school up to maybe 3rd or 4th grade, and that was it. And she ran the copy room before there were Xerox machines. She ran the giant machines that copied the plans for American Crystal Sugar Factory. And that company no longer exists, but she was very proud when they were thriving that every time a new factory was built that she had printed the plans for that factory. And she was also responsible for keeping the break room clean. So she was sort of the connector around the office. She was in the break room. They didn't give her a separate office, so she was in the break room all day. So everybody who came in and out, she would say hello to and be friendly with, and that gave her some social experiences. And she loved, after she retired, receiving her very small pension check every month because it had her name on it. My grandmother came from a time when women weren't allowed to have their own bank accounts and they weren't allowed to have their own mortgages. So trust me, everybody, I love my grandmother and my grandfather equally. But my grandfather was afforded a lot more opportunities, even as an immigrant coming to America, than my grandmother was. So the only money that was truly hers was the money that she earned through that low-wage job and the pension that she received every month as a retired person. And she was so proud of it, that it was the work that she put out into the world that earned her this little bit of money every month. And she had this little coin purse that she'd put her actual physical dollars in, because of course she didn't have a checking account of her own. So that was something that made her very proud. Her creative endeavors also made her very proud and powerful. It was a way for her to connect with friends and family. I had many, many knitted sweaters from her. Every dress I wore up to about the age of 8 or 9 was a dress that she had made for me. And another way that my grandmother expressed her power was by telling stories. She shared with me stories about her life because she felt safe in an environment with me to do so. And after my grandfather passed away, he was very hesitant to share about the hardships they experienced in World War II. So the stories were a little fewer and farther between while he was alive. But once he passed on, and it was about 20 years before she did, boy, oh boy, she just blossomed and flourished and started speaking. So I got to witness my grandmother, who was so important to me and really a beacon for me of femininity as a young woman, come into her power as an old woman. And it made me identify what being a powerful woman is, because it doesn't mean that we need to lift 900 pounds in a bench press. It doesn't mean that we need to be an overt leader to the detriment of others and have power over other people. It's not a hierarchical expression. True feminine power, which is what I want you to reclaim if you've lost it in any way, in any part. True feminine power comes from our greatest gifts. And the greatest gifts of the feminine are our emotions and our emotional connection and our intuition, our ability to tap into that inner knowing. Those are inherently feminine. Now, everyone has those gifts. Even those who lean more fully into the masculine polarity certainly have emotions and certainly have intuition. And it is the feminine aspect of them that is the harbinger of those. So if they lean more fully into the masculine, they won't necessarily bring those forth all the time. They won't necessarily trust them as much as we would all the time. And they won't necessarily have as deep and powerful of a connection as we do all the time. For feminine women, when we really lean into our femininity, we are connected to our emotions and our intuition all the time. And that is where we are going to thrive. That is where we are going to feel and be most powerful. When we're fully in charge of and demonstrating our femininity to the world, people will experience that as powerful. They will see that as inspiring, as comforting. When we are most fully ourselves, we are powerful. And this is true for anybody. Any qualities they have, when they bring them forth fully, of course, when those qualities are of benefit to others, we don't want, we don't want to go to the dark side of anything here. That's kind of the difference between the power over versus power with. As soon as power slides into power over, any qualities can be manipulated to a disastrous end. So keeping in mind that power with, and again, that power with is a very feminine, fundamental idea. Femininity wants collaboration. It wants communion. It wants to be with and for others. So when we demonstrate our fullness, when we demonstrate our power, it is going to be illuminating for those around us. It's going to be empowering for those around us. Our power will help to shine the light up inside of others as well. Now, when we connect to our emotions, when we are completely ourselves, then our emotions are going to be like guideposts for what feels right and what doesn't feel right. And when we listen to that more fully, and when people trust us, when we're surrounded by people who trust us and trust our emotional guidance, then they will be empowered by the emotions that come up for us. When they come up in a healthy way, when we emote in a healthy way, if we feel sad, that full sadness doesn't necessarily bleed out into others around us. It doesn't necessarily depress others around us. It can actually move others around us to either comfort the sadness and be present for us in our sadness, which is connective, or to alter our condition in some way or their condition in some way so that we alleviate the sadness. Now, I want to be careful because sadness is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with sadness. The point isn't to not be sad. Sadness is a normal human emotion, and it's going to happen. We want to have lives that we are free to experience the full range of human emotion whenever it is coming up. The challenge isn't that emotions come up. The challenge is when it becomes too drawn out or when it becomes harmful to others. So what I mean by that is, in a natural way, humans will have emotions that last between 60 and 90 seconds. So when an emotion arises in a natural way, when whatever incident occurs and you feel something from it, that natural basic emotion will last only about 60 to 90 seconds, and then it will pass. I know, and you're thinking to me, well, wait a minute. Sometimes I get in a funk for years, or sometimes I'll feel anxiety, for months. I understand. I do too. That is the participation of the mind and the thoughts around the emotion, not the emotion itself. When we re-traumatize ourselves by talking over and over about the incident, when we continuously think over and over about the triggering event, then the emotions drag on and become a little more stuck, and that becomes a challenge. But when a natural emotion arises, in response to something that's going on with us. It's incredible communication about how we're feeling about our environment. And for those who are slightly less tapped into our emotions, but who are tuned into us, it provides information to keep everyone happy and healthy and the energy flowing. So sadness is information. Frustration is information. Even anger is information. I told you a little bit about my grandmother. I want to tell you about another friend who I love to talk about. I think I write about her in my book, and I think I've mentioned her before on this podcast. I consider her superpower to be her full expression of emotions. When she is feeling something, she just expresses it. And she has an incredible amount of integrity so that when she expresses her emotions, it's not coupled with any kind of blame or shame or attack. When she expresses her emotions, she very clearly states what she is feeling and why. And she's open to receiving feedback about what to do or why that is or how to shift it. I've never met anybody like her. And in fact, I strive as much as I can to be like that. She's quite the inspiration in this way. She just has such a full and beautiful command of her emotions, and I find it very powerful because I watch people around her respond to that. I watch them shift and maneuver to help elevate her and make her more comfortable. But in doing so, it's not like a princess vibe. It's not like everybody's kowtowing to her or pandering in any way. They really love her, especially her husband. He really loves her, and he's very responsive. And he's very playful as well with how he responds. Oh, no, here we go again, he'll say, as some husbands will. But he's responsive. And he adjusts, he course corrects. And in doing so, they have a very symbiotic and unified communication system and a very symbiotic life that flows in a beautiful direction. So power for us as feminine women lies in our full expression of emotions and being around people who understand and respond to them in a healthy way. Another element of feminine power is our intuition. And, it's a toss-up for me, whether it's intuition or emotions that are more powerful for the feminine. I think maybe it's an individual experience, right? Because we're all different. So perhaps you as a feminine woman, like my good friend, her emotions are they're gold. And perhaps for some others of us, it's the intuition that really is where our sweet spot is for navigating life and finding more satisfaction in life. When we have intuition as women, that is absolutely one of our most powerful gifts. And I describe it as the voice of our ancestors coming through, our female ancestors coming through. They have had tremendous experiences. They have lived through millennia of this patriarchal culture that we have now inherited. And they have wisdom for us. And it's written into our biology. If you've ever looked into something called epigenetics, you know that this is actually in our DNA. It is activated by certain life events and triggers that we go through, and something arises from within us, and we don't know why. And it may not be because we've experienced anything like it before, but there is just an inner knowing that we need to do this or that, or shift our course, or respond in a certain way. Now, I maintain, and I'm happy to take bets on this one, but I maintain that anytime a woman disregards her intuition, that it will not have a good outcome. Now, I left a long dramatic pause there for a reason. I feel that very strongly. And I know that to be true in my own life, and I know that to be true in the lives of the women that I speak with as well and talk to, that we always look back on moments where we didn't heed our intuition. And we recognize in hindsight that those moments were moments of disempowerment, moments where we were not ourselves, that we weren't in our fullness, that we were convinced by the agenda of another, by someone else having power over us. If it's not right for us, if it doesn't feel right, if our emotions start to well up in a not great way, in a negative way, if we have an intuitive hit to not go down that road, but we do anyway, that is a disempowered state, and it will end up with a negative result. So embracing our feminine power is, in some sense, it's a leadership role. Because when we do it fully, those around us will be inspired by us and they will be responsive. But it just means that we're leading ourselves. We have agency. We're in charge of ourselves. When we're in full embodiment and power of ourselves, and we listen to our intuition and our guidance, we are always going to be on the right path. Now, my grandmother was very much on her right path once she escaped from the trauma and the hardship that she went through. And when she started to be able to make her own decisions, which really wasn't until she got to America and probably even decades after. She still brought a lot of her enculturation with her. I really feel like one of the greatest things that she did every day was go on a 5-mile walk. That was her ability to connect. That was her ability to be herself. She wasn't listening to the noise of others. I mean, I remember even, again, like I said, my grandfather and my grandmother share equal love in my eyes. But my grandfather voted for my grandmother. When they got their ballots in the mail, he would just take hers and mark exactly what he was voting for and then send them in. So there were still a lot of ways in which she was disempowered, but I saw her powerful when she walked. She was so accomplished with her. She was so proud that she was walking. After my grandfather died, my mom actually decided to enroll her in 5K races, walk races. And in her age group, she always won. And I remember the first time she won her 5K, she was beaming with pride because this was hers. This is what she wanted to do. This is where she found a sense of connection to nature, to her femininity, and to herself. When we're connected to ourselves, we are powerful. The other way in which women are powerful, feminine women are powerful, so emotions, intuition, leaning into those, listening to those, being in environments and around people who respond to them, incredibly powerful. When we are most fully ourselves, we are powerful. And one of the things that makes feminine women most fully themselves is their sense of creativity. Now, I have another podcast on creativity, so I won't go too much into what creativity is, but it expresses itself in many ways. It is whatever you generate from almost nothing. And as women, we can do that in incredible ways, not just by literally creating something from almost nothing in terms of having a child, but creating something from almost nothing in terms of birthing new ideas into the world. It doesn't have to be artistry. It doesn't have to be something that people would commonly term as creative, but whatever it is that you generate, whatever it is that you birth into the world makes you creative, and the world needs it. So any stifling of that for the feminine is disempowerment, and it will make us feel closed and make us feel small. Women are inherently powerful. We are inherently ambitious. We inherently understand when and where change needs to happen in our world, and we will create that change with our creativity. I think about the powerful Me Too movement and the pink pussy hats that everybody was knitting. What an incredibly creative emblem of a movement that centers women's safety. So that kind of creativity, that kind of communion and community, that kind of moving life forward, letting everyone around us know, hey, this is the best pathway for us, for my community, for my tribe. There are many pathways. I am not saying there is one pathway for all women, but for you and those you align yourself with, you will occupy a leadership role as an embodied feminine woman when you lean into your intuition, your emotions, and your creativity and start bringing forward from within you the kind of world, the kind of life, and the kind of living that is most authentic for you and most inspiring to those around you. So embracing your feminine power truly means having the freedom and fearlessness to lean into who you are as a feminine woman. Now, just as I say that even, I feel like a weight removing from my shoulders. And I also feel the juxtaposition of the spaces and places that women still exist in that make that kind of power difficult, compromised, or even dangerous. So as you listen to this podcast, my dear fellow satisfied sister, I hope you'll think about places, spaces, and ways in which you can lean in to your power that are safe and that are inspiring for you. You may be in a position where you can do this fully in your life, and you may be in a position where you can do this in one area of your life, but in whatever way is appropriate for you, I hope that you will. I hope that you will start to bring forth your power in as many ways as you can, just as my grandmother did. Another creative thing that she did was she used to make me scrunchies. She used to knit sweaters. She used to make clothing, and she used to make food. She loved me through food, and all of those ways that she brought her love, her heart, her soul into the world made my world better. And we can do that for others. So this one's for you, Baba. So for the women in your life who've inspired you, for your ancestors, listen to your intuition. For the people around you who love you, listen to your emotions. And for all the people who are around you and want to come after you, bring forth your creativity. All right, everybody, for more resources and for all the free goodies I've compiled for you, head over to my website, thesatisfiedwoman.com/empowerme, and make sure that you order the book, The Way of the Satisfied Woman, that you download the Satisfied Woman app and join me in my community, and let me know how I can continue to serve you and this movement. And until next time, be satisfied.